The story you're about to hear isn't simply about a ruler gone wrong. It's about how power, once unmoored from accountability, can bend a civilization's spine until it forgets how to stand. In the quiet after Augustus, Rome wanted reassurance. Borders guarded, taxes steady, order preserved. When Tiberius assumed the purple in 14 AD, he looked like exactly that promise. A disciplined general, a careful administrator, a man who preferred lists and ledgers to spectacles and slogans. Rome exhaled. For a while, the empire held its shape. Policies stayed frugal. The Senate was flattered with formal courtesies. The frontiers did not crack. And yet, beneath the marble calm, something began to tilt, slowly at first, then with unmistakable force. Tiberius had known loss early, and loss leaves seams. A marriage rearranged for politics, a family frayed by duty, a son gone too soon. Those fractures did not announce themselves in public. They deepened in private, where thoughts keep their own counsel. Over the first decade, the emperor's governance remained competent, even prudent, but those closest to him sensed a hardening, trust narrowing to a point, laughter falling out of practice, silence acquiring its own authority. The man who once commanded legions across forests and rivers began to withdraw from the city that fed his glory. In 26 AD, he made a choice that changed everything, not just for himself, but for a world that revolved around his will. He left Rome for the island of Capri, a crown of rock above blue water, close enough to watch the mainland glow at dusk, far enough to place the empire at arm's length. Officially, it was rest. Unofficially, it was distance, an experiment in ruling by letter, by rumor, by the gravity of fear. Villas rose along ridgelines and gardens. Couriers came and went. Decisions were stamped in wax, far from the crowds that used to shout his name. Senators addressed him in careful phrases and waited. The waiting became a method of power. Ancient writers, some bitter, some measured, whispered about what Capri became, not merely a retreat, but a mirror that showed the emperor to himself. There are stories, many of them. Some swell with exaggeration, others have the dry ring of office records. They agree on one point: the atmosphere curdled, flattery was rewarded, scruples were not. Those eager to rise learned the quickest path was through compliance. Those who refused learned how quickly a career, a household, a name could disappear into administrative fog. What makes Tiberius's turning so chilling isn't a single tale. It's the system that formed around him. Informers multiplied. Letters carried accusations like embers drifting over a dry field. The Senate, once Rome's weathered backbone, bent toward safety, and in that curve justice lost its outline. Capri's cliffs watched the sea, Rome watched the palace door. Gossip grew into policy. Policy grew into habit. And habit is the most dangerous shape of cruelty, quiet, orderly, and easy to overlook. If these hidden histories and difficult questions speak to you, consider staying with this series. What follows is the slow unmasking of what power becomes when no one dares to say enough. Tiberius's withdrawal from Rome was not only geographical, it was psychological. The further he drifted from the Senate and the people, the deeper he fell into suspicion. Letters that once conveyed administrative precision began to carry shadows. A senator's hesitation, a general's unguarded word, a friend's laughter at the wrong moment, any of these could become evidence of treason. Fear seeped into Rome like damp through stone. Citizens lowered their voices. Writers sharpened their quills only to burn the parchment after a few sentences. Even silence was unsafe, for silence could be read as disapproval. By removing himself to Capri, Tiberius transformed the capital into a place where everyone watched everyone else. Neighbors became spies, dinner companions, potential informers. The professional delatores, accusers by trade, flourished in this atmosphere. A single accusation, whether true or not, could erase a rival and enrich the accuser. Property confiscated, families broken, reputations unmade, such outcomes became as common as the sunrise. Rome's proud tradition of debate and law shrank into a theatre where the script was already written, and the only role for the accused was to fall on their sword, literally or figuratively. Meanwhile, Capri itself grew into a private empire. Its villas gleamed with wealth drawn from the farthest provinces. Officials came not to advise, but to flatter. Ambitious men discovered that gifts and compliance traveled faster than merit. The emperor surrounded himself with astrologers who traced omens in the sky, assuring him that danger lurked in every shadow. Each prediction justified another purge, another execution, another tightening of the circle around him. The empire still functioned. Taxes collected, roads maintained, legions stationed, but the heart of power was locked in a chamber of suspicion. It is tempting to dismiss the darker rumors surrounding Capri as invention, but even stripped of exaggeration, the truth remains unsettling. Isolation amplified Tiberius's worst instincts. He no longer had to face the Senate's eyes or the people's voices. Surrounded only by those who benefited from his retreat, he ruled in an echo chamber where fear was the only currency. Ancient accounts describe Capri as a place where reality blurred, where whispers replaced evidence, and where the emperor's word was indistinguishable from fate. Whether or not every sordid tale is accurate, the undeniable fact is that an empire of millions lived according to the moods of one man. The tragedy of this era is not merely the cruelty of a single ruler, but the way cruelty spread like a contagion. Each official who accused a colleague to protect himself, each senator who voted for execution rather than mercy, each courtier who chose profit over principle, they all became part of the mechanism. In the end, Tiberius's power did not rest on armies or walls, but on the small, daily choices of countless people who found survival easier than resistance. And in those choices, the shadow of Capri stretched across the empire. The years following Tiberius's retreat marked a slow unraveling of Rome's civic spirit. Outwardly, the empire endured. Ships carried grain from Egypt, soldiers guarded the Rhine, merchants bargained in marketplaces from Hispania to Judea. Yet beneath this appearance of stability, the fabric of society frayed. Fear is corrosive. It does not destroy all at once. It seeps into conversation, into judgment, into memory. Under Tiberius, fear became a form of governance more efficient than legions. Why risk rebellion when suspicion could silence a man before he even dared to speak? The Senate, once the guardian of Rome's dignity, sank into a theatre of obedience. Its members, once fierce in debate, learned to read the emperor's moods from afar, bending their words accordingly. They competed to offer flatteries and decrees that outdid each other in sycophancy. A proposal to honor the emperor might be seconded not from respect, but from terror of what silence might imply. The line between duty and survival blurred until no one could tell which was which. Senators who once shaped the destiny of nations became actors in a grim play, applauding on cue, condemning colleagues to death with trembling hands. For ordinary citizens, life became an exercise in self-censorship. Parents warned their children not to mutter in their sleep, lest a servant overhear a stray word. Friends hesitated before meeting, uncertain if companionship might be twisted into conspiracy. Even the poets, Rome's voice of beauty and satire, fell quiet. Manuscripts were destroyed. Stories went untold. The creative flame that once lit the empire dimmed under the weight of suspicion. In its place grew a culture of guarded silences, of polite lies, of anxious glances over the shoulder. Meanwhile, Capri became more than an island. It became a symbol. Its cliffs loomed in the imagination of Romans who never set foot there. They spoke of it in whispers, as if the very rocks could carry their words back to the emperor's ears. Stories circulated of lavish feasts, of gardens blooming in impossible splendor, of courtiers competing to invent entertainments for their distant ruler. Whether these tales were entirely true mattered less than what they represented. The image of an emperor detached from the struggles of his people, consumed by private obsessions while the empire carried on without his visible hand. Yet Capri was not just luxury, it was isolation magnified. In his villas, Tiberius was both absolute master and prisoner of his own paranoia. Surrounded by flatterers and astrologers, he lived in a hall of mirrors where every reflection deepened his fears. He tested his food for poison. He trusted no one fully. Even the stars charted by his seers seemed to whisper threats. In this atmosphere, suspicion did not fade with time. It multiplied. Rome was governed by a man who saw enemies in every shadow, and an empire that must endure his moods as if they were laws. The story of these years reminds us how power, once detached from accountability, transforms not just rulers, but societies. Tiberius may have withdrawn to Capri, but in truth he carried Rome with him, reshaping it in the image of his fear. The result was a nation still mighty in appearance, but fragile in spirit, an empire haunted by silence. By the time a decade had passed on Capri, the empire no longer looked to Rome for its heartbeat. All decisions pulsed outward from the island's villas, borne on couriers who carried not just decrees, but dread. A senator might wake to a letter sealed in imperial wax, its contents unknown, but its weight undeniable. For many, such letters became synonymous with endings, of careers, of fortunes, of lives. The absence of a reply from Capri could be just as lethal as the arrival of one. Silence itself acquired the force of judgment. The climate of suspicion reshaped Roman law into a weapon. The ancient charge of maiestas, injury to the majesty of the Roman state, was stretched until it covered almost anything. To question an imperial poem, to carry a coin into the wrong place, to speak incautiously in private, all could be construed as betrayal. Trials ceased to be searches for truth, they became rituals of fear. Informers were rewarded, the accused were rarely acquitted, and families were punished alongside the condemned. The law, once Rome's proudest gift to civilization, became a mask that hid the machinery of terror. Under such conditions, even natural death offered little peace. Estates of the deceased were confiscated, their reputations destroyed posthumously. Children were punished for grieving too openly, as though sorrow itself could be treason. The empire became a place where emotions were policed as strictly as actions. What was once celebrated as Roman dignity now became Roman silence, a quiet born not of discipline, but of fear. The legacy of these years was not only the suffering of the condemned, but the erosion of trust that bound society together. Amid this darkness, Capri itself became a paradox. Its beauty was legendary, cliffs plunging into blue seas, gardens scented with herbs and flowers, villas built with breathtaking skill. Visitors would have seen a paradise. And yet behind that beauty, stories spread of excess and isolation, of a ruler whose days no longer resembled those of his people. Whether exaggerated or true, these accounts reflected a deeper truth, that the ruler of Rome had ceased to be part of Rome. The island's splendor only sharpened the contrast between the empire's surface prosperity and its inner corrosion. What makes this chapter of history so haunting is not only what Tiberius may have done, but what his rule revealed. It showed how fear can warp institutions, how silence can become complicit, how the habits of cruelty can spread without swords or armies. An emperor's retreat reshaped the daily lives of millions who never set eyes on him. His suspicion became their reality. His isolation became their cage, and through it all, Rome continued to function. Markets opened, legions marched, temples stood. Civilization endured, but its soul grew heavy with shadows. The story of Capri is therefore more than gossip about a distant ruler. It is a lesson about what happens when power exists without witness, when accountability evaporates, and when fear becomes the language of governance. Rome had survived wars and invasions, but here it confronted something more insidious, an empire bending under the invisible weight of mistrust. When Tiberius's final years approached, the empire bore little resemblance to the one he had inherited. Rome remained vast, its borders stretching from the Atlantic to the sands of Syria, yet the center of its power had narrowed to the thoughts of a single man. In Capri's villas, age deepened his suspicion. He relied more heavily on astrologers to chart his fate, more fiercely on guards to secure his nights. Every shadow seemed a threat, every whisper a plot. The general, who once led armies with discipline, now lived surrounded by paranoia, commanding a world he no longer trusted. His health declined, and with it the empire's patience. Rumors of his appearance circulated, of attempts to hide his age with cosmetics, of long vigils fearing poison, of erratic bursts of anger. Officials tread carefully, unsure whether a gesture might be read as loyalty or treason. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Senate had withered into little more than a chorus of submission. Decades of fear had trained its members to bow before the emperor's will, even from a distance. The institution that once debated the fate of the Republic now awaited letters from Capri as though they were oracles. And yet, the machinery of empire kept moving. Taxes were still collected, markets bustled, armies defended the borders. This continuity was deceptive. Beneath the surface, morale had corroded. Informers still thrived, families still lived in fear, and conversation remained cautious even among friends. Rome was no longer the vibrant, argumentative society of the Republic. It had become a place where silence was safety, and where the memory of Capri haunted daily life like a storm cloud on the horizon. The death of Tiberius in 37 AD was met not with mourning, but with relief. News traveled swiftly. The emperor was gone. In Rome, the people shouted for his body to be cast into the Tiber, as though the river itself might cleanse the city of his shadow. The Senate hesitated to honor him with the rites of deification, breaking with tradition. Only the intervention of his successor secured a semblance of ceremony. Yet even in death, Tiberius was remembered less as a ruler than as a warning, a symbol of what unchecked authority could become. What lingers from his reign is not only the terror of Capri, but the lessons it left behind. Power without accountability corrodes both the ruler and the ruled. Fear, once woven into daily life, can hollow out the strongest institutions. Silence, when chosen over truth, allows cruelty to spread unchecked. Rome endured, but it endured scarred. Its Senate never regained the dignity it lost. Its people never forgot that an emperor could turn his empire into a prison of suspicion. And history never ceased to measure tyrants against the darkness that began on that island. So when we speak of Tiberius, we speak not only of a man, but of a mirror. He reflects what can happen when the limits of power are erased, when fear replaces trust, when society bends until it forgets how to stand straight again. His reign is not just Rome's story. It is a story for every age that forgets how fragile civilization truly is.